Welcome. The show's name is The Next Chapter, where we talk about writing, books, authors, publishing, editing, everything and anything that has to do with the written word. I'm your host, Fred Hughes, best-selling Amazon writer. And this week's show, coming up starting in the second segment, we'll be welcoming Kacey Ezell, international best-selling author, writes for Bain Books, writes for Chris Kennedy Publishing, writes a little bit of everything. She's an amazing woman, retired Air Force, war veteran, stay-at-home mom now, so she can write full-time, and it'll be fun talking to her. One of the reasons why I reached out to have her on today's show is tomorrow, as of the airing of this show, is the first day of LibertyCon 36. And that's a science fiction and fantasy convention in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'll be there, and today's guest, Kacey Ezell, is the Master of Ceremonies, which is like a really big deal. LibertyCon isn't a big convention, but it's not a small convention either. You know, as the promo slide that was up on the screen, this is the 36th LibertyCon. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't had a marriage that lasted that long yet. So 36 LibertyCons. So it's obviously not going anywhere. It's considered an important convention in the author world. And today's guest, Kacey Ezell, is the Master of Ceremonies. I'll be there doing panels, so if you're in the Chattanooga area, stop by and give me a holler. I'll be selling books outside the main auditorium for 3 hours in the afternoon on the opening day. So stop by and see me. Now, the part of the show where we talk about new stuff coming up. I decided I'm a Chris Kennedy writer, and I'm going to start spotlighting the Chris Kennedy books that are coming out. So this week, if we can get that one slide, there we go. These are the next 4 books from Chris Kennedy Publishing that are coming out. The Devil's Outpost by Devil's Outpost by Chris Maddox. That's actually came out on the 14th of June. And then the next new release will be Iconic by A.J. Gordon and Peter Alden. That's out on June the 28th. Then Bill Fawcett and Casey Moore's, the 3rd volume of their series, No Further, is out. And then a former guest on the show, Johnny Sears, his most recent book in the Lunar Free State will be out on July the 5th. All great authors, all military science fiction, all established series. So check them out. If you've got Kindle Unlimited, download them on your device. If not, spend the money for the ebooks because they're well worth it. Oh, and just so you know, it doesn't show up in that screen, but the next 2 books after that, and Chris Kennedy coming out on July the 12th, is Bureau 42, which is a 4 Horsemen Universe anthology, which yours truly has a story in. Yes, the guy who doesn't do short stories very well was asked to write a short story for that novel, and it's coming out on the 12th of July. And the week after that, my next book, which we don't have graphics for yet, Prince Imperator, will be out, and that's the ninth and last book in the Prince of Britannia series. Not the last in the Empire, just the last in that story arc. We'll talk about more about that, both of those books as the release date approaches. So, what else is new? One of my favorite authors, I think, based on his sales, one of the most famous and well-liked authors in the world, Brandon Sanderson, announced that he just turned in book 5 of the Stormlight Archive series. The numbers on this book are just incredible. It's supposed to be out late this year. Like I said, the name of the book is Wind and Truth, Book 5 of the Stormlight series. It is 491,000 words long. To put that in context, a standard sci-fi or fantasy novel that you're going to pick up as an ebook or on Kindle Unlimited is probably going to be from 100 to maybe 125,000 words long, maybe as many as 150. So this book is literally 3 times to 4 times to 5 times bigger than any book you're likely to pick up this year. And because it's Brandon Sanderson, it's all going to be quality. And there's a lot of people who have been waiting, my wife included, who's already pre-ordered it and gotten, the hardback version of this book when it officially gets released, that is. I don't have any in with Brandon Sanderson, so don't be sending me emails about how can I get a book for you. 491,000 words. And he said, he made the comment in the posting that I read that he checked the folder where, the story resided in his computer. And I don't know how he saves it. I don't know how he writes. But he said that the first date on a file in that computer was March of 2021. So he's been writing on this book since March of 2021. So 3 years and a few months. And I'll also tell you that this isn't the only thing he's been working on. Those of you that, read Brandon Sanderson know that he's been working on a multitude of other books. And not only that, he's also turned around and been actively engaged in Audible. And I don't want to say taking Audible on, but we've talked about it, how he's chosen that to confront Audible about the royalties and Audible's royalty sharing with the authors who put books up on Audible. And it's even worse for the authors that end up getting forced to use Audible to help them create Audible books. For those of you that didn't watch that episode or haven't heard me talk about it before, a typical author is lucky if he gets 20% royalties on an Audible book. So if you see it on Audible and let's say it's priced for $20, the author who actually wrote that book that was turned into an Audible novel might get $4. Might. And that's if he doesn't owe a narrator anything for it. I mean, it could be more, depends on what kind of deal he might have worked out. But authors don't make a lot of money on Audible books. It's just the way it is. And it's hard since you're almost stuck selling the books through Amazon, you only have one source of revenue for it. Anyway, But I'm not saying don't buy Audible books. I only listen to Audible books, so I'm a big fan of them. I make sure my books are in Audible. And oh, by the way, for my fans out there, book 6 in Audible is being worked on right now. Book 6 of The Prince of Britannia we're working on that right now. I don't have a release date for that, but it is being worked on. All right. After we come back from the break, I'll be talking to Kacey Ezell, best-selling author. So I'm Fred Hughes. This is The Next Chapter. I'll see you after the break. Welcome back. It's The Next Chapter, and as promised in the first segment, I'm happy, ecstatic to welcome Kacey Ezell to this week's show. Author, veteran, war hero, and she does so many things, I don't even know where to start. So, Kacey, why don't you tell the people that are watching about you and who you are?
Sure. Hi, my name is Kacey Ezell. I am most of those things that Fred said. I do not claim the title of war hero, but I did marry one, so there's that. I write emotionally charged adventure fiction, which is kind of vague, but that's because my publisher accuses me of having ADHD when it comes to genre. My most recent series is behind me here, and that's a space opera series. It's called The Ashes of Antisea, but prior to that, I was writing military science fiction. I write fantasy. I write a little bit of horror. So I'm kind of all over the place. But the constant thread throughout my books is that it's emotionally charged adventure fiction. So if you like that kind of stuff, I'm your girl, right?
And I'll also mention that in this last series, her publisher also helped co-write the books with her.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he's so the first book, The Queen's Fixer, is me by myself, and then for the second and third book, I needed a pirate captain. So I was like, I'm an Air Force veteran. I don't know anything about naval combat, which is what most people equate space, piracy to being like Age of Sail piracy. So I was like, well, who do I know that can do this? And so I called our publisher, Mr. Chris Kennedy, and was like, hey, man, want to write a book or two? And he said yes. So that's how we've got that. But like Fred said, here it is. This is the Ashes of Antisea series. And there's my website, kaceyezell.net, where you can get that if you're interested in that. But like Fred said, I'm a veteran. I served 23 years in the Air Force. I'm a helicopter pilot, and I've been writing professionally since 2010. But like most writers, it was sort of a compulsion from like the time I was really little. I always like made up stories, and I was the really bossy little girl in the playground, like telling all the other kids, okay, you're going to pretend to be this character and you're going to pretend to be this character. We would make up random, huge scenarios and play them out on the playground at recess. And then as I got older, I started writing that stuff down, and here we are. So.
And now you're getting your daughter involved in it.
Yeah. That's true. So, okay. All right, here's my life story, Fred. Are you ready?
Okay.
I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 2019, or no, in 1999. Goodness. And then I retired from the Air Force in 2022, and went to work flying EMS helicopters for about a year. But then, surprisingly, out of the blue, my husband got essentially what amounted to a job offer over Xbox from one of his Xbox buddies. And we decided to pursue that opportunity, moved up here to New England. And so now I'm a full-time writer and homeschool mom. And my 11-year-old daughter knew I was working on this series, heard me talking about it to some of the other authors for an anthology project that we've got coming up this summer. And she said, well, Mommy, that sounds really interesting. Could I write a story for it? And when you're, at the time, 10-year-old homeschool kid says, Mom, can I write a story for your anthology? You say yes, because nepotism is important. So my kiddo and I, we co-wrote a story set in this universe that will be one of the stories featured in the upcoming anthology. The title of it, which we haven't announced the artwork yet, but it's really, really cool. The title of it is Remnants of Empire, and we're expecting that to be out probably late July. Chris hasn't released a release date yet. I think it kind of depends on a couple of other factors, but the art in this series was all done by artist Sam Kennedy, and it's so cool. I love it because it's like classic space opera with the sweeping vistas and the sci-fi elements, and yeah, so super happy to be working with Sam for the anthology too, which will essentially be volume 4 in the series, because it's like a sandbox series, right? Where there's myriad different stories to tell throughout the universe, and I want to tell as many of them as people will pay me for.
Well, plus they're a good way, and I've talked to folks on the show about how short stories are a good way to expand into a full novel. You create that icon. You somehow stumble onto an iconic character or whatever, and then people liked it, and it's like, I need to build him. I need to expand him.
Yeah. Yes, and as our fellow author Marisa Wolf would say,
yeah.
Because I fully agree, right? The whole reason that I connected with Chris Kennedy Publishing in the first place was through a short story that I wrote in the Four Horsemen universe. Chris and Mark Wandry, who's the creator of the universe, they liked that story. They invited me to expand it into a novel. I called that same Marisa Wolf and said, hey, do you want to help me make this into a novel? And together we wrote the Depic trilogy, which is Assassin, Ally, or Assassin, Hunter, and Ally, in that Four Horsemen universe. And they were very successful. But you're right, it did all start from the concept of that one character that I created for the short story. That the other thing too that I think is great about short stories for authors is the word count's a little less intimidating when you first get started. It's a lot easier to wrap your head around 8,000 to 10,000 words than it is 100,000 to 150,000 words, in my opinion. But it is a different skill set, and that's something that I think some authors struggle with when they're getting started. Is that you could write an amazing novel, but maybe your short fiction doesn't hit quite right because the pacing's not quite right, or vice versa can also be true.
I have that problem.
Yeah, right. Sometimes it's really hard because you're used to thinking in 100,000 word character arcs or plot arcs, and trying to cut that down to essentially 10% of it can be really difficult.
Yes, creating the character, and then you want to start world building, and it's like, I'm at 10,000 words and I haven't even started telling the story yet.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I kind of think of short stories a lot of times, particularly in speculative fiction, which is sci-fi, fantasy, the kind of stuff that we write. That world building piece is necessary because it isn't our world. You have to tell the reader where you are, what's going on, and kind of explain a little bit of it. And sometimes with short stories, you have to be a little sneaky in how you do that and how you reveal, the structures that make the world work. What is society like? What kind of food do they eat? How do people interact with each other? Are there other creatures that they interact with? How do they interact with those creatures? How do they get from point A to point B, stuff like that. And like I said, it's a little bit different skill set in doing that with a novel when you have 100,000 words to a short story when you have, like I said, 8 to 10,000. So a lot of hints.
Yeah, a lot of innuendos, a lot of vagaries, so that you can move on with the story. So we're going to go to the break here. When we come back, Kacey's going to talk more about writing and how she writes novels. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is The Next Chapter. Welcome back. This is the next chapter. I'm Fred Hughes, and we're talking with internationally best-selling author Kacey Ezell, who, and part of her, me, pumping her up as far as being she's also been nominated for 2 Dragon Awards and should have won one of them, but that's just my opinion. So Kacey, we were talking about your short stories and expand, and that's how you started with Chris, in the industry, specifically with Chris Kennedy Publishing. And that expanded into writing some 4HU novels, actually 3 of them, a trilogy, right?
Mm-hmm. I wrote a trilogy with Marisa Wolf, and then I did the Tortantula book with Mark Wandry. So I currently have 4HU novels, 5. I just released one.
That's right. You just did release one.
Yeah.
So, so talk about how, as an author, how do you get your story written? I mean, plotting, planning, fly by the seat of your pants. Everybody does it different, and I've heard you talk about it before. And I don't want to say have a unique way, but you have your own style. So let's talk about that.
So I am a plotter. And the reason that I'm a plotter is because when I first got started, I thought I was a pantser. And then I would write, and I love stories that have intricate twists and turns to them and situations where, the characters end up doing something that is surprising in order to get, to solve whatever problem or whatever. As I said before, I wrote emotionally charged adventure fiction. So, I like the adventures where, there's some serious stakes for the character on the line, but I also like the emotional piece of it. And sometimes in writing both of those types of stories, it's very possible to write yourself into a corner and be like, well, I got them stuck in this like haunted house with their enemies their enemy that they're like incredibly attracted to, but how do I get them out of it? So you could write yourself into a corner and not know, not know exactly where you're going to go or how you're going to get them out of that. And so I stumbled upon an influencer on YouTube named Sarah Cannon, who she's an author, and she's an author coach when it comes to like productivity and planning. And she had a series of videos on how to plot your novel. And I think I signed up for her mailing list, and her like mailing list magnet, one of the things that she offers is like a plotting workbook. And I just checked it out. And I thought it was very interesting the way that she broke down plotting, because it was similar to, but still kind of her own synthesis of a lot of different plotting structures, because there are 1,000 different ways to plot a novel out there. But I liked hers and it resonated with me. So I started trying to use it. And what I found was that in the process of plotting out my novel using Sarah's workbook, it would allow me to kind of think about the situations ahead of time that I was getting my characters into, and then go, okay, so what would be a logical way for them to get out of that? Or what would be a surprising way for them to get out of that? And then once I've figured the solution out, then I need to, what I can do very easily in the outlining phase is go back earlier and plant the seeds to allow them to have the tools, if there's a certain MacGuffin they need, or, what James Scott Bell in his book Superstructure calls the Q factor, right? It's like from James Bond, he gets this cool gadget from Q that you think at the time, you're like, a shoe phone, what's a shoe phone going to do? And then that ends up being the thing that allows James Bond to escape from, the clutches of the bad guy. So, being able to plot out the novel before I start drafting has really been helpful for me to figure out those things that I'm going to need in order to carry the story through, in order to, make it a satisfying story that allows both the adventure plot and the emotional plot to reach the conclusions that I want them to reach, and the character to have the growth that I want them to have. So that's step one, right? Really, step one is I figure out my character. Usually, I think, Fred, I think you start with character too, but it's like, okay, who is this person that I'm going to tell the story about, and what what growth do I want them to achieve, and how am I going to make that happen? And then from there I go and I plot it out. And then once I have a plot, once I have an outline, I use Scrivener as a tool, and Scrivener has this view that's basically like index cards, basically. I mean, it's a program, so it's all on your computer, but they're shaped like index cards, and I'll use that view to basically like put in all of my plot points. And typically how it ends up playing out, and it changes. Some plot points are only a scene long or a scene or two long, but most of the time, the major plot points that I figure out roughly correspond to what would be a chapter in the book. And so I'll figure out, okay, what scenes do I need to write in order to make, this chunk of actions that comprise this plot point or this beat happen. And so then I'll plot out my scenes using those index cards. And then once I've got that view, my story is pretty well plotted. And I'll go into Scrivener and I'll write it sort of scene by scene using that view as a guide. Now, when I say that I use it as a guide, in the Air Force, we have a saying, and I'm sure other people say it too, but it's really just a plan to deviate from, right? Like, so that's not to say that I don't veer off or change things as I go, because I absolutely do. But one of the things that again, I like about Scrivener and about the plotting system that I use is that when I do that, it's very easy for me to go back into that view and update my outline to reflect whatever changes I've decided to make, if they're major enough to require that. So that's what I do prior to drafting, or, while I'm drafting. As for the process of drafting itself, my personal writing process is very informed by my life, as everyone's is. As Fred mentioned, I'm a retired military officer. I was writing while I was on active duty. Now I'm a full-time mom, and I'm also a homeschool mom. And if you've ever known anybody who homeschools, that in and of itself could be a full-time job, and also, trying to like live like a functional human being with a clean house and a full kitchen and feed my family and do all of those tasks that are required for those purposes, which is also a full-time job. So I have to be pretty concise and disciplined about my writing time, and how I'm going to use that writing time. And I have a whole, like, again, I'm a big devotee of influencer Sarah Cannon. She's Heart Breathings on YouTube if you want to go check her out. But I use her planning system, which is designed specifically to help writers know, okay, when you sit down to work, you have a limited amount of time, to work on your goals. What tasks are you going to accomplish? I use that. That's what this board is behind me. That's just a part of the whole system. But when it comes down to it is, I'll sit down and I'll have like maybe 3 hours to write during the day. So I need to be on it for those 3 hours. And one of the tools that I personally have found to be very useful is the idea of sprinting. So it basically it came from like the Pomodoro method of studying, where you work in a concentrated, focused fashion for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break, and you do that through multiple iterations. The thing that I like about it is it's very easy, again, for me to wrap my brain around, okay, all right, I know I've got a bunch of other crap going on that I need to handle, but I can sit down and I can focus and I can ignore the rest of the world, and my kid will be okay because she's 11. She can entertain herself for 25 minutes, and in that 25 minutes, I know just through practice and keeping track that I can get probably about 500 words. And when you're in the midst of drafting, at least for me, when you sit down and you think, oh my God, I got to do 3,000 words today, that can feel a little bit intimidating, or even 500 words can feel a little intimidating. But if you can break it down into bite-sized chunks, and that's really what the sprints are for me, it's like, okay, cool. Now I've got 500. Right. And I can go do something else, or I can sit down and, I can stretch and I can sit down and do another sprint. And then I've got, 1,000 or rough thereabouts. And it's just sort of like a brain hack kind of way of making it feel less daunting to me to sit down and nug out my story. Now, there are times when I'm really into the story and like, I don't need any of these tricks because it just feels good. It just feels fun to write. And those are the best times. But any writer who tells you that there aren't times when it feels like a grind is lying to you. Either that, or they're
Or they're
utilizing
mentally
chemical
deranged,
enhancements to
one or
get
the
them
other.
through. Because it is a grind sometimes, right? It's a process. You're creating something out of nothing.
Well,
So
you get to that
yeah.
point in the novel where I need to write this section, but God, it is just so boring. But I have to
Yeah.
have it to be part of the story.
Right. I need to connect this and that, and this is the only way to do it. And it's not as much fun. Yeah.
So when we come back from the break, and oh, by the way, Kacey, I don't know why you don't. There are so many, this is how to do it videos and books and everything out there right now. I don't know why you don't do your own, because this was a great explanation on
Oh, thanks.
creating a novel, and you should can it. I mean, I'm serious.
Okay.
So when we come back from the break, Kacey's going to talk about what's coming up next for her. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is The Next Chapter. All right, we're back from the break. This is The Next Chapter in Fred Hughes, and I hate to say it, this is the last segment, and we'll have to finish up talking with Kacey Ezell because it's been so much fun. But we talked about how you write, we talked about what you've done and who you are. What are you working on right now, Kacey?
Oh, great question. So, like I said, we just did the launch for the Ashes of Inticia series behind me. I just turned in the anthology that I mentioned that has 13 stories by about 15 total authors writing in this series. So that'll come out this summer. I'm currently finishing up edits on a sword and sorcery project that I'm submitting to Baen Books, because I also write for Baen Books on the trad side. And I'm finishing up the first book. So don't know if they're going to pick that up yet. We'll see. I hope that they will. And in addition, I'm also working on I'm just starting a kind of a new experiment. I'm writing serial fiction for my Ream subscription, which is it's a subscription service where you can support authors directly. Kind of like Patreon, but specifically for writers. I just started that, and I'm really excited. Writing serial fiction is, we talked about how short stories are one animal and novels are another animal. Writing serial fiction is yet another animal that I'm finding. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a cool experiment.
Because that's like a chapter at a time, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's yes, and it's like writing. It's like writing a television show, because you write like an episode at a time. And so each one has to still have a complete arc within the episode, but it has to be like a short arc. And then the whole thing has to connect. Like we could do a whole show talking about it. It's
okay. We may, because,
cool.
But yeah, it seems like to me you have to connect it with the previous segment,
and then there's
and the connection connected to the next segment. So, I have anyway. So you're writing. You're writing. I can't even imagine doing that. So you're writing your in Ream and a serial, and you're doing a sword and sorcery book, hopefully for
hopefully
major,
for Baen, if Tony decides
for a major
it's for their
public,
audience.
Yeah. So
yeah, and then so that's what I'm writing. As to like what else I'm working on. So next week, I am going to be the Master of Ceremonies at LibertyCon, which is it's like one of my two favorite conventions in the entire world. It's in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so I've been, as a Master of Ceremonies, I have to give a speech at opening ceremonies, and I have to introduce the guests at the guest of honor banquet. And so I've been doing a fair amount of writing for that, trying to prepare for my remarks in my role as MC there. But I'm super excited about it, because LibertyCon is one of the reasons it's one of my favorite conventions is that it really is like a family reunion. And everybody says that. Like Brandy, who's the chair, she starts off every LibertyCon by saying, "Welcome home, welcome to the family reunion," because that's really the vibe, And Fred, you've been there. Yeah, it's a good time. Are you going this year?
Yes, I will be there.
Nice.
Nice. And for like Chris Kennedy, it's almost like a home convention, because there's so many of the CKP authors that are going to be there.
Yeah. It's I would say so. The official home convention is FactoryCon, which is one that Chris puts on himself. But a lot more people can get to LibertyCon because it's in the summer and FactoryCon's in the fall and kids have school and yada, yada, yada. So yeah, you're right. There's always a huge CKP presence there. Chris does one of those 2-hour CKP year ahead presentations just because there's always so much to discuss and so many of us are there and we all want to talk about our babies. And so, yeah, it's a really good time. I'm really looking forward to it.
So what, because I know I don't want to say you hit the convention circuit, but you do quite a few conventions. And
I do.
So what else? No, and that's not a bad thing because I used to poo-poo that, but then I've talked with several, major influencers in the publishing world, and it's like, if you're not doing, you got to get out there and you got to meet your fans and shake their hands and tell them how much you appreciate them, and at the same time interact with other people in the industry because you never know what opportunities are all of a sudden going to come up.
100%. So yes, all of those things are true. The truth is, can you have an author career without going to conventions? Absolutely. Is it going to be harder? Maybe, right? Like the great thing about publishing in the day and age that we live in is that you can literally do whatever you want. It's just a question of, well, how well is it going to work for you? And is it something that, are you going to take is not doing this thing going to pull you back from your goals enough to where you're going to want to suck it up and do the thing anyway? Or is there another way that you can work around doing those goals, right? Like for me, I'm an extrovert. I love meeting people. I love meeting fans in person. I love interacting with people. That's why I do things like, biz TV shows and have my own YouTube channel. And I go to conventions so that I can extrovert enough to connect with the people who want to read my books, and bring them in and be like, hey, I'm awesome. My stories are awesome. Come be my friend. Come read my books. With me. Let's join this community together. It's sort of the fan community theory of how to be a successful author, which is something that I fully subscribe to. And for me, part of building that fan community is going to conventions. But if that's not your jam as an author, okay, cool. Figure out something else. And there are myriad other ways to do it, because again, we have the advantage of the internet. So yeah, I do like the conventions. I have a good time. It's a fun way for me to, like I said, meet my fans, interact with my peers, interact with industry professionals, networking, all of that kind of stuff. But it's also not mandatory. Right? Nothing's mandatory.
I mean, and it won't hurt you not going, but it's not going to help you build your brand either. And building your brand is everything.
Well, building your brand is important. I wouldn't say it's everything. I think building your brand is second only to telling a good story, right?
Yeah.
First
write
the good story. And I will always stand by this, that, your best marketing tool is always your next book, right? So writing has to be the priority. But then behind that, if you really want to do this professionally as a business, you got to build your author brand, just like Fred said, and figure out what that is. And the key is to work with your own personality, right? Like I mentioned, I'm an extrovert. I like people. So I go out and find the people and I talk to the people and I charm the people and I, flirt with the people and say, hey, people,
and you
I'm
do
fun.
that.
I'm awesome. Come read my books.
And you do that very well. So if you want to see Kacey and you're in the Chattanooga area, stop by the Marriott and say hello to her. So that's it.
Say hi.
That's it for this week's show. I want to thank Kacey Ezell for being on. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is The Next Chapter. Come back next week.